Are you a scaling SaaS founder?
Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where freedom is like a toddler with a permanent marker, unpredictable, messy, and full of creative chaos. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I hope B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. Today is all about freedom. So happy 4th of July to all my American friends out there here in the States and abroad. One of my most memorable Independence Day celebrations was actually in the UK. Yeah, England. Obviously not a national holiday there, but lots of expats and friends celebrate. It's really pretty fun. Freedom. It's a core value nationally. We adopted it for the business space, and every founder and entrepreneur should fully enjoy freedom as well. But sadly, few do, and most don't take time off. So why does it matter? Why is taking time off crucial for leaders? Did you know that taking regular breaks can boost productivity by up to 40%? And that's true for you and your team as well. It's time to relax, recharge, and refocus for better leadership and well-being. Let's face it, taking time off as a leader can feel like an impossible feat. We push this hard with the founders that I work with. 100% of the time, they say, I can't do it. And then they do, and they love it. It turns into, I have to do this. It's a total game changer. So why does it feel impossible? I think there's the guilt of leaving your team behind, fear of missing out on critical decisions, and that nagging feeling that you're indispensable. The thought of, what if I'm gone and, the business burns down? These challenges create a cycle where leaders feel like they have to always be on, always be in control, always be in charge, always be present. And it leads to burnout and decreased effectiveness. But the truth is, not taking time off can hurt your productivity and your team's morale. So how do we break the cycle and embrace the benefits of a well-deserved break? So here are 3 strategies that I use to take effective time off. Number 1 is to plan ahead. Schedule your time off well in advance. This allows you to prepare your team and ensure that all the critical tasks are covered. Inform your team and clients about your planned absence so that everybody is on the same page. And I do this every year. We actually plan out the year in advance. It's time off, it's events, it's schedule. It's everything that we're doing for the year is planned in advance. You call it laying down the train tracks. My coach taught me this. And then the train just goes. The year starts and it just goes. So everything is already planned in advance, and it is incredibly freeing to know that, this is happening and this is when it's happening. Second is to delegate tasks. Trust your team and delegate responsibilities. Empower your team members to make decisions in your absence. This not only helps you disconnect, but also fosters growth and confidence within your team. It shows them that you trust them and prepares them to take on more responsibility, which is what you want long term. You want them to grow and take on more, right? This is a good test for that. And then number 3 is to set boundaries. Establish clear boundaries to protect your time off. So important. Avoid checking emails and work messages at all if you can. But if you have to do that, you feel like you have to, then have some very focused, really small time block that you do that. Take a half hour, do it, and then put it away and be done with it for the day. Communicate your unavailability and set up an emergency contact if absolutely necessary. And this is something in business that I call the fire blood rule. You can't Google or chat GPT that. There's a training in our group called Time Off Without Fear. And the fire blood rule is something that we used with our kids. My wife actually came up with it. And we used it when we went out on date nights. Once our oldest became old enough to be the babysitter, none of them were babies anymore, but siblings squabble and stuff goes sideways. But instead of calling us for every little thing, the rule was if there wasn't a major crisis, like the house is on fire or somebody's seriously hurt, if there's fire, if there's blood, then call. Otherwise, don't call. And that made date night way, way better. minor problems were solved, and there was never a major crisis. And I took that same concept and used it in business too, and use it with our founders. And they love that. That they can take that time away. And if there really is a problem, if a system is on fire or there's a problem and we're bleeding cash, then call me. Otherwise, decide, handle it, use your best judgment. And I'll tell you, that fire blood rule works like a champ. Remember, truly disconnecting and prioritizing time off to recharge and refocus is absolutely essential for better performance. Plan ahead, delegate, and set boundaries to make the most of your breaks. Your productivity and your well being will thank you. So, when was the last time you took a true break? Really? We'll celebrate freedom this week as a nation and as a leader. Take time off. You got a holiday Thursday. Friday's really simple, so you got 4 days in a row. Disconnect and come back refreshed with new perspective. Share your experiences. I'd love to hear about that. Let's commit to taking time off and coming back and leading with renewed energy. You have tips how to take time off, or tell me what you did? Drop it in the comments. I would love to hear about that. Our expert guest last week was best-selling author and customer experience expert Richard Wildman. He shared his insights on elevating the client experience and the importance of relationships in driving revenue. And I highly, highly recommend his new book, 100 Proven Ways to Acquire and Keep Clients for Life. I've read it 3 times already and still working through it. So much good stuff in there. And our founder last Tuesday was Baird Hall, co-founder of Turnkey. We talked about how not to pour revenue into a leaky bucket, cancellation flows, and what is working right now in SaaS to stop churn cold. If you missed either of those episodes, go back and give them a listen. Great, great stuff there. My guest today is Eli Goodman, co-founder and CEO of Datos. Datos revolutionizes behavioral analytics with privacy-compliant data sets for institutional finance and corporate markets. With over 2 decades in strategic partnerships and sales leadership at top data firms, including JumpShot and Comscore, Eli is a recognized industry authority and keynote speaker dedicated to advancing data licensing and analytics. Welcome someone who will help us successfully navigate a cookieless future, Eli Goodman. Hey, Eli, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Jeff, great to see you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, tell me a little bit about your founder journey and the kind of where you started and launching Datos, and how your interest in the internet's evolution influenced your career, market research, and data analytics.
That's an expansive question, because I certainly, to age myself, I graduated college back in the late 90s, right? And went into tech and tech research at the time. So certainly have seen a wide spectrum of things, right? Over the course of that.
Yeah.
It's, when I was coming out of college, it was, and I'm not going to go all the way back with it, but it was really about, I've always loved math, like math and statistics are something that are very close to my heart, believe it or not. But I did not want to go be a banker, right? Like all of my friends that left and went into finance. And at the time, tech was just getting off the ground. And, I had been approached just by recruited, it's like 1999 by Gartner, like a very large, tech research firm. And I ended up just going to work there as like a young sales guy. And I loved it, right? I like everything that we would talk about in like the research and quantitative and qualitative. And fast forward 25 years, and I'm still in it. Right? This is definitely like my life's work. I joke with people like I might not be the guy to tell you where to go hiking in Switzerland, but this is definitely something that I do know about. Right? Like this is as ingrained in my call my pathways as anything I have going on.
Well, it seems like just a natural fit. Just your background, and this is just the perfect use case for that. It would be a waste for you to be a banker. This is where you belong.
No, I appreciate that. Nice you say. And I'll tell you what, right? I think that like anything, when I didn't start out as entrepreneurial, right? In the sense that I was going to found my own company. It really was something that developed organically over time. And probably, one of the number one parts about it was you talk about like luck favors the prepared, or luck
Yeah.
is the residue of preparation, or whatever term you want to go with it. It really was just about, like, as things have developed and I have continued to learn more or try different things, and not every move is up. Some of them are horizontal. Some of them are in completely different directions and trying different things. Is it was about having the right idea, right? Like, timing was very important. And really, and this is then where, like, the Datos founding story came out of. And as we're going to talk about today, related to like SaaS and SaaS founders, is we're in the DaaS business, like data as a service. And if I look at the past decade, not only did I see that there was an opportunity for what Datos has become in order to sort of fill some gaps in the marketplace, but really, one of the big things, and certainly for SaaS companies, has always been, it's about insights, right? Like, you
Yeah.
go to a SaaS because you buy results, right? You buy the end game. And that's what the SaaS is doing. It's like taking all of the ingredients, if you will, and churning them out into like baked cakes, like, like the end result. So for us, I didn't feel that, for me, that was necessarily like where I needed to go. Like, I had some sort of new great idea about that. But I am a big believer in data infrastructure and supply. Right. And this is really when we sat back. It might not be the sexiest story when you think about it, but it is one that, that I believe that the tech world, and particularly the SaaS world, needs, which is perpetual and trustworthy data supply. Right. It's a very perilous marketplace out there. There's a lot of data. Who can you trust? What do you believe in? What works? What has fidelity? And so on and so forth. And that was really where we wanted to be, right? If that's why literally the name of the company is Datos, which is just Spanish for data. It's called Data Inc. But that is, for us, we believe that that's something that was sorely missing in the marketplace, right? Is that it's very hard to go out and find the right ingredients to bake your cakes with, to carry on, my metaphor. So, that was really like where the founding of it came about. It was just timing and really just sort of seeing that particular unique niche as we saw it, that needed to be served.
Yeah, it is definitely the right time, and started in 2020, and then you're acquired by SEMrush here recently.
Yeah, so that was somewhat recently. So it's wild. Listen, I joke about like better lucky than smart, right? There's other ways to be able to say things. But I think that was really where, when we were sitting back and thinking about it, was 2020. And believe it or not, all of this was founded from the couch. It was literally the middle of COVID, right? It was like mid 2020. And my co-founders and I, who had never even met in person at that point, we had just connected over LinkedIn and sat back and thought about our thesis for what the business could be. Officially got it off the ground and incorporated, here in the United States in late 2020, and then as of the end of 2023, had gone through a majority acquisition with SEMrush. And I think really in the end, like a lot of that, so it's a wild 3-year story, which certainly we could chit chat about, but it goes back to, for us, focusing on a core competency and not getting out over our skis. Right. And I think that is also, if I were to offer advice to anybody, right, there are the venture capital, private equity world, like that is that's a very unique animal, if you will, right? That's a difficult animal to be able to deal with. And like, their needs don't necessarily always align with founders. Sometimes they do. So don't get me wrong. Like, there are any number of ways to be able to run a business. But one of the things with SEMrush in particular was, we went the strategic investor and strategic acquisition route because we believe it gives us and our clients I want to say that just a much longer time frame, but like, let's say, a much smoother curve on how to be able to do things and do them right, as opposed to what could be at times outsized revenue and growth requirements that, like, the VC or private equity model may require. And it didn't necessarily align with what we believed was appropriate for our clients and our data suppliers and our employees and everybody that we work with. So it is something with which that to harken back to like Winston Churchill, I talk about it as the end of our beginning. Right? Like the early part of our business and where we were. And I really couldn't be more excited about like what type of firm ground that puts us on as we move forward.
It seems like a really, really natural fit. And I love strategic acquisitions. I think that's one of the best ways to do that. But just a great strategic fit between what they do and what you do, especially with the evolving landscape. privacy
Yeah.
concerns, data regulations, and kind of getting ready for what's coming.
Yeah, and I think that's you're dovetailing into what is one of the most important things that we talk about, particularly as again a data business, right? So
Yeah.
again, not just like a SaaS, but data as a service business, and there are so many things that a company, whether it be a SaaS founder or anybody, needs to be concerned with out there. And it's a moving target, right? Like
Yeah.
what things were 5 years ago or 5 months ago could change very rapidly, depending upon where you are in the world, depending upon your particular industry, depending upon regulatory overview, court of public opinion. Like there are any number of ways you can go with it. So for us, if you think about like one of actually the first lens that we look through for any decision that we make as a business, it's really about future proofing the business, right? Like how many chess moves ahead can we look to be able to see and determine and gauge like what would be the next right step. So your point there about fit, right, is that a lot of that, I mean, certainly SEMrush is it's a very successful business over the past 15 years. And I really enjoy working with them even before, we teamed up, right? Like on a corporate end of things, simply because they take what I believe to be a very long view of like what things will be, right, in the coming years, right? It's not just about tomorrow or this quarter or what have you. And again, that's really how we see like the data, and again, going into the data supply landscape, right? Is that it is, let's put it this way. Great movie that I love called Margin Call. And in the movie, Kevin Spacey has said, you know damn well that you don't sell somebody something unless you're damn sure that you're going to be able to sell it to them again, right? And that's actually a very important way when I think about the building of a business, is that you need to be able to work with companies where you are selling them something that they will want to come back for more, right? And that requires not always doing what's in your best interest short term and thinking about like the long term play. And I say that then for a SaaS founder that we may work with, or any SaaS business for that matter, that buys data, they're buying data from us, not for the data itself, but for the product, and more to the point, the profit that data will be able to help them down the line.
Right.
And it does them no good to go build a product that they won't be able to continue to support and sell in the future. So there's that's why I mentioned, the analogy when I think about like us with SEMrush or data in general, or we think about how we work with clients and you talk about fit, that to me is the number one thing, right? Like how does it all fit together in order to like drive what is that, call it ever increasing future together, while thinking about all of the future barbarians at the gate that you're going to have to deal with, because that's just the nature of it.
So what should SaaS founders and executive leaders be doing today to prepare for that future? Say 2 years down the road.
I'll tell you want to know one of the number one things? I would start with a red team. Right? If you're familiar with what a red team is in the world of decision making, and there's a lot of different ways to be able to talk about it. But the first things first is you need to have somebody, and it could be a different somebody each time when you're making big decisions, that their entire job is to sit there and think about every reason why what you guys are planning won't work. Right? Like there's every single thing that you might not even think of in order that could be detrimental to your business. And I think that that's one of the most difficult things as not only as a founder, but if you have a founding team, and it's like myself and two co-founders, and the way that we set things up, we almost naturally took on that type of decision making because we were very different and we look at things through different lenses. And I found that to be incredibly helpful, right? Because if you surround yourself with only like-minded or like what have you people, is you're going to miss a lot, right? Like different perspectives can be very valuable. So, and also the last thing that you want, to be frank, it feels like negativity is never good, particularly on like a small group, but it's not negative. It can be negative, right? If people are being destructive, like you're like, that's useless. Like, thank you for that.
Right.
But it's really about being constructive, right? Being honest and being constructive. So it's okay to say no, or it's okay to say that's a bad idea, but you better have another idea, right? Like, show up with solutions, not with problems. But I mentioned that it's sometimes in the beginning you get together, you're going to start a company and it's everybody that are your friends or people or you guys agree on everything. So that's why actually taking that stance, that red team analysis stance to like the big decisions, not every decision, like where should we go to lunch? But I mean, you're talking about the big things. It'll be very helpful simply because you need to have somebody in the room that's going to say, that's not a good idea, or at least even play it's not a good idea. And then you can, figure out if it is a good idea.
Right. Well, how should companies be preparing for the coming shakeup? I think in marketing in particular, just the cookieless world. We've got a lot more privacy regulations, privacy laws. Those are continuing to change. How do they stay flexible and innovative and continue growing when a lot of these things that we've kind of relied on historically for marketing data are going away or changing drastically?
So I'll tell you, I could talk about this for hours, right? But like certainly the first things first, and this is going back to me joking about my age or longevity here, I feel like in the internet, is you have to go back to a time and remember that advertising worked before one-to-one internet, like perfect targeting at the right time, like it still worked, like television worked, like print worked, like these things,
right?
Messaging, context, timing, whatever, right? You could talk all of your classic brand metrics and things like that, which I won't have to hammer through all of them right now. But, that's the first one, is just getting your head around the fact that even though the landscape is changing, that doesn't mean that advertising or targeting or retailing or whatever way that you're merchandising, however you're looking at things related to new, call it privacy regulation and sort of the direction blowing of those winds, that doesn't mean that your advertising doesn't work anymore.
Right.
But you need to then so first you get your head around that, right? Because some people, they're native internet. Like it's never even been a consideration about a time that you just sort of like will randomly say, I would like to go to Venice, Italy. And then 5 minutes later, you just are being served ads. You know what I mean? It's just like, you need to disconnect from that. So that's the first one.
Yeah.
Once that happens, you can then start to think about, okay, if it doesn't have to be one-to-one or, again, like anything that would be crossing over any type of privacy divide, how could that still be effective, right? And I think that's where you start to get into, now doing some analysis and thought about what matches up with what I have going on. Am I selling to individuals? Am I selling to segments, populations, right? Like, do I sell toilet paper? Like, you don't target toilet paper. Like, everybody uses it, right? Like, but if you're targeting like something very specific, right, which is like Abercrombie and Kent high-end $30,000 African safaris, then it'd be different. Now you got to start thinking about your people. So really thinking about like your particular product or business or what your marketplace looks like. But I think that is segment-based and contextual-based advertising, I feel like still works, right? And it still can work very well. And measurement or attribution is still almost, I don't say impossible, but it's very difficult to also do that in the right way. So I think that's also where you start to get into it is we've all been dealing with advertising with the machines, if you will, for some time, like programmatic advertising. We know what that is, and SSPs and supply side platforms and demand side platforms and data management platforms. So not to just acronym myself out. So I'll just say the actual names of the acronyms. But, we've all been dealing with that for so much time. You then, even if you have a pendulum swing back and you start to think of like the actual messaging and the creative and whatnot, there's still a science to it, right? So you don't want to just sort of say, well, this feels right, right? So I don't think there's anything groundbreaking to be able to say here, but figuring out how to be able to like at least measure, at least quantify what you're doing, let alone qualify it, like, in a sense to be able to be like, okay, we know what we did, but did it work or how do we change it? But there's not a silver bullet for everybody. It isn't that easy just to be able to say like, well, that's what everybody does. Let me go do that.
Right.
So that's one big one that I would say. And listen, the Googles and Facebooks of the world have lovely tools to help you with that. So don't get me, it's not as if that, all of the central places, aren't moving in that direction, right? All of that is fair. But going back to that red team analysis that I recommend for almost anything is that you also don't want to necessarily trust every single like big publisher or big tech or what have you. And I don't mean that they're lying to you. I don't mean that whatsoever, but it's important to be able to have, different places, or more like, say, micro place, like a Reddit, for example. Maybe that works better for you and what your particular product is, because you want to be part of the community. And maybe that plays very well, right, with what you have going on. I saw a great, I'll just reference this because it was a great, like, just Twitter thread that I saw the other day. Somebody was talking about Ace Hardware, right? They're like, why are there all these Ace Hardwares everywhere? And like, why do people still go to this place? Because there's like, you got Home Depot or Lowe's, right? Why would you go there? And it was pretty interesting where, one, not being familiar with the nature of their business, like individual owned Ace Hardwares that are part of a co-op, so they know it, they negotiate together and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But also that their entire thing is about being a smaller business that has literally experts that almost read your mind when you walk through the door. Like, you show up with like, this is broken. How do I fix this? And they'll be like, oh yeah, son, come with me. And then, they take you in the back and it's like somebody's grandpa. And he's like, this is exactly what you need. And you walk in and walk out and
Right.
you love the experience so much. So I reference that as, not every business, even in the same industry, is built the same. The DNA is different. There are things that we do that we believe are very inherently different than our competition, whether it be bigger competition or same size or smaller or whatnot. And those are, what do we stand for as a business? And then sort of working our way backwards on whether it be what marketing channels or what works for us and whatnot, versus other things. So I think that's you got to figure out, do you want to be the Home Depot or do you want to be the Ace Hardware? Both of which are great businesses, right? It's just about figuring out which one is for you, particularly as the founder or founders, because y'all set the tone, man. You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of it. And, I realize over the years it's sort of like I recently just became a dad, and this is something, as I think about like what it will be. You don't realize oftentimes that the people that work with you or for you, things will come out of your mouth or they'll see you do things, and you don't realize that they are remembering every single thing that you did, right? Good or bad. And that's what I mean by setting up the tone, is if you know what your business is about and what you're after, and you could set simplified, not only, it's like, again, I don't want to buzzword it and just say it's like simple goals or simple this, but just that you could make like the idea, the what is this business about, and make that very simple and help people with like that decision-making paradigm that lines up with that. You'll be in a much better position to hire right and to be able to be much more effective. Again, even if we're talking about what type of advertising or marketing or community medium would be appropriate.
That is really, really good insight in thinking about that. Well, as we think about like anonymized behavioral data, the potential of that to predict future trends, can you elaborate on that? How can the data be used effectively for business decision making?
Yeah, so this goes back to my point about like that pendulum swing of what used to work and hasn't worked, and how, what's going on there. And let's just call it in not only the world of advertising, but just intelligence in general, right? I think that we've all been hearing for many years about the commodity of data or the business of data or whatever, right? But just like data is the new oil and all these different things. There's so many, just call it like cliches and whatnot, and many of which I use. Don't get me wrong. it's a nice, easy way of summarizing stuff. But what happens is that, going back to that point about future proofing, and I say that for what anybody has going on, if your business is predicated upon data, and particularly data that has to do with consumers, and this is not just the internet. There's credit card data, there's cable television data, there's data. Everybody's just kicking off exhaust data at all times for decades, whether they think about it or they don't. And, one of the big things that you need to be sort of aware of, and this is going back to that future proofing, is that from our perspective, the days of one-to-one personalized targeting, I don't want to say they're over, but like they are definitely waning. Right. And what's funny is when you swing that pendulum back to remembering just philosophically that whether it be advertising or targeting or whatever it is that we're all doing used to work without it on that type of level, is anonymized information at a large enough scale with a representative population will answer the questions that you need in order to figure out what it is that you should be building or what you should be selling or who to be selling it to. Because I won't go in like I'm not a psychologist, right? So to not be the right person, but we all believe that we are these unique snowflakes, right? We all have been taught that forever, and everything is about we're so different and all of that type of stuff. But again, classic advertising used to be based on your zip code plus 4. The idea being that people that just lived in general proximity to each other, on average, bought the same cars and read the same magazines and watched the same TV shows. And to be honest, look around at your peer group around you. That's probably not that far off than it is right now.
Yeah.
Although, we get all of our targeting on an Instagram or something like right down to the millisecond about what type of action I took and whatnot. So if you again get your head around that and you start to think about anonymized behavioral data, is that anonymized data, when you be able to just study behaviors of people and start to think of them as segments or groups or, again, a behavioral mass moving in a particular direction, is you don't necessarily have to laser target things, right? You could really start to have like a wider and wider scope about like where your messaging, may land, without necessarily losing the effectiveness. It's just one of those things that like everybody's gotten so wealthy on it, to be frank, right? Like think about the trillions of dollars that have been created and spread out into the world based on what has been like this one-to-one internet targeting for so long. It's hard to unwind that. You asked a question earlier in this, in our podcast here about what should somebody do to prepare for that. And I think, so I do want to reference this, that you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? If your entire thing has been based on one-to-one targeting, like since the beginning, you're not going to just unwind that overnight, right? So that's fair. And that's why there are any number of reasons that like Google is delaying cookie deprecation, and you have like the IAB and the advertisers battling against them. And everybody's trying to figure out and find this Goldilocks zone that is just right on where things are going to land on both privacy, but as well as protecting their own financial interests, right, at a business level. So that's where, to me, and this goes back to sort of that red team analysis again, is separate yourself, and let's pretend for a minute that you just completely remove tomorrow personalized targeting or personalization or whatever term you want to use for it. Ball's going to keep on bouncing, right? Like, what I mean? Like business got to go on. So that's where I say about when you talk about our business, and that was for us, we talk about building a business, a data business that was anonymized first, right? As opposed to, being like a legacy type of product and then making money, which could definitely happen quickly, but then trying to unravel that can be very difficult. So, which many as millions are going through. So I would say if how does one do that? The starting point is to be able to have like a completely independent, anonymized, whether something based off of anonymized intelligence and data, and start to see what you could drive there. While you start to figure out and prepare for what could be, I'm just going to call it an evolving landscape. I'll be honest, I'm not a Nostradamus. I can't tell you what's going to happen in 3 years or 5 years or what have you.
Sure.
But going back to that point around, we just believe the same way like credit card data, for example, has existed, like that transaction data that's available for purchase, but it's completely anonymized. And that data comes in very handy for a million different things, whether it be understanding like where people are buying what. That's great for institutional finance and hedge funds, companies that are thinking about where should we put our next big box store in person. There are any number of ways to be able to do it. And assuming that data isn't being sold for the targeting of things, it's just information that, believe it or not, on an anonymized basis, serves the consumer, right? To have that information as part of the data economy, so that, again, if people in your neighborhood are the ones that need a Home Depot versus an Ace Hardware or whatever, to go back to our example, if the credit card data or any other anonymized data is pointing to that, I could tell you that the powers that be are definitely looking at that information. And you could still come up with what are the outcomes that people want. And I say that whether it be I'm using a Home Depot in your neighborhood or in your area as an example, but also the messaging that you need, right? It doesn't, people will talk about ads in the sense of like, I don't want any ads, but like nobody wants to pay for the internet, right? You're not paying Google for every search that you do, right? So to be fair, like everybody is almost like implicitly agreeing to what is the advertising intelligence apparatus, but you also need to take care of people's privacy even when they're not thinking about it, right? You need to solve for the lowest common denominator and not the highest, right? To make sure that everybody feels safe and protected. So it goes back to why anonymized information in all facets can be so important, so that you could figure out how to be able to still get people what they need without crossing a line. And I say that not just like a virtual line, but like an actual legal line, right? Like as things change, as we see with
Yeah.
GDPR here, or GDPR in Europe, or here in America, like different things, with different types of regulatory bodies that they look at that we all read about. Like it's, AI, like what's going on there, right? Like I don't even have to, you don't need me to talk about that. I'm sure there's about 1 million podcasts talking about that big battle,
Sure.
right? Relating to data that feeds into it. So, but anyway, I know that's a long way of getting to it, but anonymized behavioral data, which in Clickstream, which is what we deal with, it's part and parcel of what is that broader trend and what we buy into and believe in, like really believe in, which is that anonymized data, and again, with enough scale and enough fidelity, can still serve both buyers and sellers, as in the people that are, selling things and buying things, like the consumers at home, can serve everybody's purposes and still deliver relevant messaging and relevant products and the things that they need and they want to learn about without overstepping bounds.
Ready to future-proof your company and scale to new heights? Dive into the ultimate resource designed for SaaS founders and C-suite executives. Champion Leadership Group gives you an unfair advantage in scaling up revenue and outwitting competitors. Imagine solving your biggest scaling headaches and hitting 5, 10, 20 million ARR and beyond with ease. At least way easier than it is now, because we take away the guesswork and the grunt work and replace it with framework. By supporting you with our on-demand fractional C-suite team, a powerful operating system built into software, and a thriving community of fellow scaling founders. That's how we make it happen. Stuck at your current revenue level? This is your ticket out. Feel like your company is the world's best kept secret? We amplify your success. And hey, if you're already crushing it but too busy to breathe, we got you. We'll free up 20% of your time in the first month. Now that is freedom. Now is the time to upgrade from traction to scale. If you're ready to work smarter and not just grind harder, schedule a 10-minute growth brainstorm. It's free. It's not a sales call. Can't buy anything. And we will together pinpoint the number one thing that is blocking revenue. Visit championleadership.com. It's where leaders evolve and companies transform. Yeah, it's really, really good. I think that there is definitely a change coming in just the way that we think and the way that we target. And even now, I mean, the effectiveness of ad spend and tracking that attribution is challenging, to say the least. What strategies do you recommend for accurately measuring, advertising ROI, going forward? How are you thinking about that?
So I'll tell you how I think about it, right? Is that I am a results oriented person, in the sense that, like, I don't necessarily care how we got here, as long as we're not breaking any laws or anything, but I don't care how we got here as long as we have the result that we're after. And I think that what happens, especially when let's talk online advertising. Like, let's say that this is our our universe
Sure.
we're playing within. Oftentimes the metrics, which are quantitative, are built from the ground up, in the sense of, well, look at all the changes I made in my SEO, or look at all the different things that we did. And it ends up being like ads impressions or target, CPMs. There's like all of these quantitative metrics that you could play with and be like, and to be honest, like even today, like my head of marketing, to her credit, we were talking about like, the average cost like per lead, like on LinkedIn and things like that, and how much better the efficiency had got there, all of which is awesome. Like, these things totally matter, but none of it matters if it doesn't turn into sales, or it
Yep.
doesn't turn into whatever your end game is. Like, if you're an insurance company, it's not even sales, it's people that request a quote via your website or what have you, right? So you got to think about where the bottom of the funnel is. So when you're talking about measurement, and I'm talking about earlier simplifying things, I could guarantee you, if you sat back and thought about what is the number one thing that we need to accomplish here, almost every business could probably settle on one.
Yep.
1A, 1B, and then work their way through it. And if you can't accomplish 1 or 1A or 1B with whatever you have going on, maybe you need to go and reevaluate what you're doing. right?
Yeah.
So that to me is part of the issue is people get caught up in the details, right? Like the top of the funnel, and which all of which is very important. Like again, a funnel, the idea of it is if you start here, it'll eventually get you to where you need to be. But when it comes to measurement, I would actually go to the end, right? I would go to the result that you're after and work your way backwards and then start to set up like what should we be measuring and then more to the point above that, what should we be doing that we should be measuring that will eventually get us to a thing that we could measure at the bottom that matters. Because if you just think that it's all going to be top of the funnel stuff and it'll be like, well, I got enough leads through the door. Okay, well, how many of them converted? What was the sales efficiency of those people that came through the door? How long were the sales cycles? How much money was spent to be able to get, what was the
Right.
quality of them? Like, if you're just looking at bottom up metrics and trying to build it that way, and then be like, well, look at all these Legos that I put together, and they all stick together, but they didn't actually turn into anything, right?
Right.
This isn't my Death Star that I bought over at I don't know whatever toy store you buy the Legos at these days. My kid's young enough yet; I haven't got that far, but like. The that's what I'm saying is okay. Yes, it's a bunch of Legos, but did it actually get you to the end result that you're after? So that's where that's more of a strategic way of looking at it. Like, again, I'm not going to get into like measurement tactics. There's a million companies and different
Sure.
ways to do it. But if you're being asked by a measurement professional, whether it be an organization or a person that works at one, and they don't start with, in my mind, not what do you try to measure, but more to the point, what is the result that you're after? I would push them hard on that to be like, yeah, it's not about metrics that I need to measure. It's about results that I need to accomplish. How can your measurement help me get to that? And I think it's just a way of looking at the problem that at times it's like your classic feature benefit selling, right? Which is like, look at everything that this does, but like, where does it
Right.
get you? You know?
Well, I think in a lot of companies, that's the way that the people are trained is they're looking for those metrics. And some of it is just to justify their existence. Some of it's justify the spend. Just find some sort of way to be able to attribute so they can do more of that thing, whatever it is, and
Well,
kind of
that's kind
missing
of it.
out.
You're hitting on it just right, which is, and that goes back to the point about somebody at the top needs to set the tone or help understand what's important. Because individual people will always do that which is to their individual benefit, right? And
Yeah.
if I am the SEO manager or I am the merchandising head or whatever, right? I'm going to set up metrics that like show and demonstrate me doing my job. Right.
Yep.
But if we all have like different metrics that we're after, it's like, well, look at the total number of new clicks that I got us or our average ranking space on Google or whatever. All that's important. Like, don't get me wrong, but it has to be attached to a business outcome that we all share. Right. And that's actually, at Datos, and I say this across every department, right? We're around, I don't know, 45 people now, give or take. Got some people, that'll be joining us soon. Every single person at the company is, if you were to ask them, and I hope that they would if you met them on the street, but like, if you ask them, what is it that Datos does, right? Like, what is it that we do? You could talk about clickstream data or anonymize this or DaaS business or that, but what do we do? We are a business that build things that our clients want to buy. We sell stuff, right? That's the purpose of our business, right? Like in the end, and I don't necessarily want it to be that reductive, right? But I'm also not changing the world here, right? This is, it's important to be able to understand. So every single person at the company, we will talk about what our main goals are and what it is that we're after. And at a top level, like, the nature of this business is in order to stay in business. And like there's no better way to be able to do that than to have clients that are happy and will continue to come back and do things. Buy things from us. So I say that, when it comes, your point about individuals and how they are set up is that compensation and achievement and success metrics, I firmly believe should all be set up based on the same aligned goals of what the company needs.
Yes.
What is the company after? And if it's growth at all costs, fine. Then it's all about growth. If it's about margin, fine. Then it should be about margin and profitability. But it can't be all things, right? So therefore, that goes back to my point. You need to set it at the top to say all decisions are made through this lens. And then therefore all incentives and all plans and all that we're after, we also should judge it based on that single, or again, a limited set of ideas. It's not always on the one, there could be three, I don't know. But you see what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
I think that's and these are things, by the way, it's not like I came out of the womb knowing all of this. These are things that I've learned over the years, right? So to be clear, right? Like it's, I don't want to just be pontificating for the sake of it. I definitely, I'm saying these things. This philosophy has been done based on as many mistakes or failures that I've had as I have had successes. And it's only going to continue to go that way. So trying to minimize, where your misses and maximizing, your hits is really like the theme of what I'm going with here today.
Yeah. So on that theme, what have been the big hits and maybe some misses in building Datos, from startup to acquisition and now continuing on?
So I'll tell you what is probably, let me just start with the hits, right? Like something that is like, and I use this as like prior failures in my career, right? In the sense that if you were to ask me one question, right? Like I am starting a new business, or I'm a young business, and like, you're always trying to figure out like little nuggets that help and work for you. If there's one thing that I would say, especially at a small company, because a startup is going to be small, right? You're going to start out with one person, maybe five, whatever it's going to be, is spend the money and hire smart, senior, independent, experienced operators as much as you can. Because scaling is one of the most, I don't say impossible, but one of the most difficult things to do as a small business.
Yes.
Because you as a founder, or you as a COO, or you as a whomever, you are not a scalable resource. Like at one point, and it can't just be like, well, just follow me around for a few weeks and do what I do, right? Like that doesn't work. Like that's not how it gets done.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely no way that a small business is going to be able to operate if every single person that comes through the door, you have to hire them because they are young and inexpensive, because you need to train those people. So I say that as that's a first one, right? Is if at all possible, pay more for senior experienced people and have less of them, right? As opposed to churn them and burn them, right? That's sort of the first one. The second thing, and then this is, if I think about, again, using other times that fail would be a tough one, but with something, let's say I had mistakes or had to kind of work through this,
Sure.
is do not hire people unless you are in a position to set them up to be successful, right? Because you cannot expect everybody that walks through the door to be able to just turn water into wine because you said so. Right? Like that is like, so you just do it, right? Like, and sometimes you do have, like, every time you find a unicorn, I've definitely hired people and been like, damn, you are amazing, right? Like that's really good. And maybe it's sometime in the past, maybe I was one of those, right? You never know, right? How people look at it. And some people are just born to be able to answer questions with very little information, or to be able to accomplish with very little direction. But that's not most, right? Like, so, and that's okay too. Like all of these people can be successful in any number of ways. But I think that that's an important thing is, again, you start with senior people because they will be able to like come up with ideas and execute without you having to hold their hand all the time. But the second is, you should ask people and be like, before you hire them, what do you need? What will you need from this business in order to be successful? Because if they say, and they list out a bunch of things that you are not going to be in a position to give them, then it's probably not a great fit, right? Like that doesn't mean there isn't somebody else that walks through the door and says, I don't need all that. I just need, some string and like, you know what I mean? Like somebody could MacGyver that, or I don't know if anybody knows MacGyver these days, but like if you were going to have to like workshop something from nothing. So that's also like a very important match. I feel like
it is,
to be able to get that done. So those are a couple things. Like if somebody were just like, we were to sit down and have a beer, and I were to tell the anecdotes of that, which is for a different time, about exactly what went down. And it hasn't always been perfect, but those are definitely like learnings. So when I talk about Datos, the highs, it absolutely has been that, right? We focused on and have hired senior people that know what they're doing and are able to execute. But every single one of them, before we went through it, was like, what do you need? And like, and not that I've always been able to give all of it right out of the gate, but that has never left the back of my mind. And we continue to evolve so that I know when I got something going on, or I have greater resources, or we're thinking about what the future would look like. We have a live ongoing conversation about, hey, remember that thing about what you need in order to flourish, to thrive here. Well, I'm finally in a position to be able to deliver it. Right. So let's sit down and talk about, but also let's talk about where that is today. That could have been 6 months or a year ago, and things could be very different. Listen, mistakes, right? You always make mistakes, right? There's any number of things. Yeah. And I would say that this is also, when you're finally sitting in the seat, it is very difficult to be able to manage timing, right? And I think that is something that, and by timing, I just mean time in general. And I don't, I'm not just talking about, how many hours in a day. I mean that, and I actually had a discussion with my team earlier today about, there are any number of things that are going to happen, like macroeconomic trends or big companies that you deal with or sell to or what have you. And big companies and macro world, they don't need to make changes or do anything fast. It's actually set up by design in order to be slower, in order to ensure that like mistakes aren't made or whatever. There, stickiness and all, there could be a million different ways, good or bad, about why you talk about it. But time, as in speed and urgency, is something that at a small business we're able to control. And I think that, so when you talk, I don't want to talk about so much as a mistake, but something that, we have gotten better at over the course of the past few years is figuring out exactly how hard we want to push on that urgency pedal with outside forces versus how hard we push inside. Because we are definitely like a sales first organization, right? I've always been a sales guy. That's like my thing. I love selling stuff, right? I'm into it. Yeah. But I also don't love what are boiler room sales tactics. I think that there's absolutely ways to be intelligent and thoughtful, but still be aggressive and like really help people solve problems without having to like pick them up like old school Seinfeld. Do you want to buy a computer? Do you want to buy a computer? Right? If your listeners are familiar with that reference. So yeah. I mentioned that as figuring out like our particular like level of push versus pull on that aggressiveness. That's not so much a mistake, but again, something that I believe we've had to figure out so that we could ensure that everybody on the other side of any, whether it be negotiation or any type of table, shares the same sense of urgency for us. Because, again, at a small business, you can't get that time back, right? Like, if you start to get behind the eight ball on something, it does compound, as it relates to like pipeline or fill, particularly if you have sales cycles that are very large. Like some businesses work on an MRR basis, like a monthly recurring revenue. Others, our business is more about ARR, like what happens in annual increments, just because of the nature of what we do. And like DaaS is about like data infrastructure and not just like, I bought a candy bar and I ate it. So how many candy bars did I sell today? Right? Like, so which is, again, totally fine. Good business. Like we all like candy bars, but that's what I'm saying. So if you're asking about things that we've had to adjust, it's figuring out, and certainly like, one of my main jobs as a CEO is about ensuring that everybody at the organization has the right sense of urgency about everything that we do. But I also need to make sure and want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that doesn't, I'm not even going to say scare customers away, but would leave them with y'all need to back up, like calm down, right? So it's figuring out that right thing of like, business has got to be done, but I am going to be firm on it because like, time is of the essence here. And like, but time is valuable to me. So if you are willing to trade me time for something, I am willing to trade you something that you need as well. So I think that that's where time in that sense and speed is a currency for us. And it isn't necessarily a currency on the other side. So to go back to your point, figuring out what the right currency should be and how to go about it with whether it be buyers or partners or employees or anybody that is on the other side of that, call it speed, urgency, currency discussion. That's something that we have gotten better at, simply because it was in the beginning, that 0 to 1 thing, like you just try to keep your hat on. It's wild. So anyway, I could go long in the tooth with it further, but that's just to give you a sense on a few things.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Well, as companies are starting to think about investing in-house in their data science capabilities, bringing it in-house instead of just relying on outsourcing, how should they be thinking about that? And what impact does that have on decision making and results?
Yeah, so this goes back to some of the decision making paradigm stuff that we spoke about earlier in here. But I'll just say this is that if you are building, right, whether that be, a house or a data strategy or anything, quality of the ingredients is incredibly important,
Yep.
right? You could talk all day about having a lot of them. You could talk all day about them being like, this is good for some things and not for others. But being able to define like what represents quality to you as a builder is very important, right? So, and the only way to be able to do that is to go out and get in the game, right? So when you're talking about companies that are hiring and building their own data science capabilities or insights or analytics or whatever group name that you want to be able to call it, these are effectively groups that are going to be tasked with churning milk into butter, right? Like that, they are going to have to create something out of like what are ingredients that need to be transformed. And in order to be able to do that, those people that are working for you and working with you need to be able to have some sort of insight or process on how they go about defining the quality ingredients for them. So that's why I go back to just because you could throw a bunch of smart people together into a room, and there's a lot of smart people out there that are brilliant at different things, you really need to have somebody that is, I don't know, almost like the connoisseur of the group to be able to say like, hey, I know we're all drinking wine here, but like I do have some experience in like how to be able to make some choices. And in the end, as somebody, I'm not like a Mr. wine drinker, but like I definitely can taste the difference between something that's like, yeah, this is really good and this isn't. And but there's no way I could navigate like the menu at the steakhouse that has like 1,000 bottles in it, right? So that's where, again, not to speak entirely in metaphors, but I'm from the South, so everything's a metaphor to me. I just use them all the time.
Of course.
That is an important factor, right? Is you need to have some people on that data team or analytics team or what have you that know where to even begin when it comes to sourcing what is the ingredients that you need. And here's the thing, it even is necessarily outside ingredients. Sometimes the first start of it is help us get a handle on our own data. And you're like, okay, right, fine. Like we don't even, not about buying outside data. It's about, okay, we have a lot of our own internal data related to whether it be customers or clients or employees or whatever. How do I sift through all of that to be able to determine like what are the real quality pieces here that we should be focusing on and making sure that we have that are stable and, in ample enough supply and whatnot. So I think that's you're asking about how to go about it is, again, having somebody on that team or some buddies. Everybody could be it. It'd be awesome if everybody had this type of experience. But like, you got to know where to begin. Right. And I think that that's also why hiring somebody that is senior to help put together a team would be very helpful. Because if you just throw a bunch of junior data scientists together, do they necessarily have what is the history or experience together to be able to help judge and say, where should we even begin? Right. Because it's almost like an unlimited set of permutations that you could go in. So that's where I would go with it. Right. Is somebody that is like that quality expert that like taste the ice cream or like the beer meister, right? Like, like Anheuser-Busch or something, but somebody that really has the nose for it.
That's really important because especially when you're talking about data and building models and what you're doing here, predictive analytics, the quality determines everything. So, you build something with poor quality data or bad assumptions, it messes up the entire thing. So it is about having the best ingredients going in there to have something really premium that comes out the other side.
Sure. But then from there, you got to have the right tools.
Yep.
You got to know how to be able to like deliver results. And then even if you do get results, you got to figure out which ones do we actually want, right? So this is, it's a never ending, as I say to my team often, fashion is never finished, right? Like, and I think that is, that's one of those things is, what it is that like data science and data and like that ebb and the flow, it never ends, right? But that's okay, right? Like I appreciate that. I do like what is the infinite nature of it, but you need to be able to figure out, like, going back to that measurement. All right, we accomplished something, but which is this good thing? Is this really what we want? Right. And that goes back to, maybe there's somebody on the team that's better at assessing quality of results as opposed to quality of ingredients. And like,
Right.
it just sort of comes back to, I think I mentioned throughout this podcast, just, having different people with different perspectives and different levels of experience will really, when it comes to data, which is a somewhat young business here, right? Like, the crunching of data and whatnot is incredibly important when it comes to like your ability to be able to like get the results you need.
Yeah. And that's what it's about, is the results. It's the outcome. So all the good
I hope so.
ingredients.
The journey's cool. Like, I guess, and listen, I travel a lot, and certainly you'll talk about, like, people will talk about, like, part of the whole, the vacation is about the getting there. And like, we could argue about that depending upon, how your plane flight goes. But in a general sense, like, the journey is it's not just the destination, it's the journey. Forgive me. That's probably the right term for it. But like, so it is important, right? The things that go on along the way, the tactics, the individual decisions that get made, they are all part of the thing and do matter. But again, I feel like that simplification from a decision-making strategy and paradigm will be very, very helpful to be able to get everybody to like rowing in the same direction, that we all land at the place that we need to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I end on this question, and that is, we talked earlier about, is it Datos or is it Datos? And I love that, Datos, and that's how I would say it. And then, we have the same question now, post-acquisition, SEMrush or SEMrush?
It's funny. So a couple things. I'll tell you, Datos and Datos, it's actually no different than data and data, because Datos is just Spanish for data. Right? It's literally just data ink, and it has a lovely sound in the Spanish language. So that's the first one. You could potato or patata this thing, I guess, as you see fit.
Well, it has to be data.
That is perfectly fine.
Weird. Data is right.
You want to say data, then you would say Datos. I say data. But some people say data, and that's fine too. So we would go absolutely either way with this, and I have no problem, depending upon where somebody's regionally from around the world, that they could say it any which way that they want. SEMrush versus SEMrush. It's actually, I think that either of those play. It's the same idea. Like, it originally started out, as we well know from their, you look at their brand name, it was like the capital letters, SEMrush.
Right.
But I believe, like any business, as you evolve, right, you could start out in one place and now you cover a lot of different things. And then the brand name there had changed. And again, that is their business to be able to talk about their brand. But if I'm saying it, I say SEMrush. That's how I would pronounce it now. Although when I type it on my phone, it still comes out SEMrush from all of my many years of typing in things into text message over my old search days.
That's great. Well, thank you for the clarity on that. That's very helpful.
Well, I'm happy that my clarity was both ways. That was literally what I clarified, is that they all work. So it's the least I can do.
Say it any way you want, just call us, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, speaking of that, where can people find more about you and about Datos online?
It's simple enough, right? You can certainly find us at datos.live. That is our website, right? We are happy. You can find us there. We are also on LinkedIn at Datos Inc. You can track me down, anybody on my team. We are, going back to like one of our big things, we are very friendly, right? That is actually one of the standing orders here, is be friendly to everybody. So hopefully we would love to have any of you reach out, and we would be honest. If it's not a fit for us, we could direct you to our friends at SEMrush or any place else for that matter. If we are not able to help.
Outstanding. We'll make sure and link that in the show notes, and everybody should be following you online as well. Have some great content.
Yeah, totally. And if you want, my Twitter is actually at Los Buenos, with my last name being Goodman. It's an old nickname, The Goods. So you could also track me down there if you wanted to follow.
Outstanding. We'll link that in the show notes too.
All right, great.
So Eli, thanks for being on SaaS Fuel. It's a great episode. Thanks again, Eli, for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. You can learn more about Eli and Datos at datos.live. All links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well. Full episodes, video shorts, training, some outtakes, lots of stuff there. And that's at Champion Leadership on YouTube. So be sure and check that out. Thought leaders share. Share this episode with someone you'd like to hang out with at a 4th of July barbecue. Who knows? Maybe you'll even get an invite. Everyone who shares this week gets a pair of Freedom Firecracker flip-flops. These sandals light up with mini fireworks every time you take a step, turning your walk to the picnic into a parade of patriotic pyrotechnics. Join us Thursday on our SaaS Fuel Expert Series, where my guest is sales expert Darius Lahutafard from Medic Academy. Darius went from robotics engineer to CEO by 28 years old and was a key contributor to the Medic sales methodology. We talk all about SaaS sales and how to apply the methodology. And the next Tuesday, we have founder Albert Owusu Asari, founder of Kadana Pay. He is transforming how international team members are paid and making it faster and easier for everyone. And that is a challenge that definitely needs to be solved. So really happy to talk with him. I will see you next time. Happy Independence Day. And as always, enjoy the journey. Go get some time off.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.